we wanted to begin the conference by having a conversation on being agents of change. And we have a lot of expertise in this room already, of people who are in the field. And so what we wanted to do is we thought we'd bring in some friends with an outside perspective to take part in an open-ended discussion on the topic. And we're very pleased to have Carol Gore of the Toronto Star act as moderator. Many of you will know Carol, but for those who don't, she's been writing about social issues for more than 30 years, paying particular attention to low-income Canadians, people with disabilities, new immigrants, and the forgotten elderly and those who work tirelessly to make their lives better. She's also a trustee of the Atkinson Charitable Foundation, which promotes economic and social justice. Carol?
Welcome, everyone, to the first plenary of what I hope will be a productive and thought-provoking conference. My name is Carol Gore, and I'll be your moderator for the panel discussion that's going to unfold over the next hour or so. The purpose of this panel is to talk about how each of you can work for change in your workplace, your community, and at the provincial and federal levels. You've already chosen a vocation or field of interest that allows you to improve individual lives. This is about taking the next step in your journey. None of the people on this podium is a literacy specialist. But all three are agents of change. They know how to explain complex issues in clear, comprehensible language. They know how to convince people that the reforms they believe in matter. They know how to get the attention of the media and put pressure on public officials. They've made headway in lean times like this. They've also hit brick walls. But after years as activists, they haven't lost heart. They're still going as strong as ever. I will introduce each of the panelists as they speak. Then I'll kick off a discussion among them with a couple of questions. After that, I'll turn the floor over to you. Our first speaker is Judy Rebick, a lifelong activist. She is best known as the former president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women. But she is also a writer, educator, broadcaster, and speaker. She is currently a professor at Ryerson University, where she held the Sam Gindin Chair in Social Justice for 8 years. She has just published a book called Transforming Power, From the Personal to the Political. Judy?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. I thought I'd first tell you a story about a change that didn't happen. The hashtag reminded me that the first time I ever heard of Twitter was at a conference quite like this, actually. I was in the audience, so I wasn't on the panel. It was a very geeky conference, and I started a thing called rabble.ca in 2001. It's an independent website. And so I know a lot of geeks, and I'm kind of a closet geek myself. Anyway, so this thing, Twitter, they say, oh, Judy, you got to get on Twitter, blah, blah, blah. And what they were doing is that as the panel was talking, people were tweeting comments about what they were saying. And it was I thought it was the most amazing innovation, silent heckling. And it seemed so appropriate to Canada. But the problem was, you see, the panelists couldn't see because the screens were above their heads. But this is perfect for it because There's the screen. So if we could get, the internet up here, we could do it right here. Or those of you that had the tweeters. Anyway, but the reason that this change didn't happen, because I thought, I didn't really, at the time, I didn't like Twitter very much because it was all geeks on Twitter, and I didn't really want to read what they had to say. Later, I realized, I think it was during the war or during the revolution or semi-revolution in Iraq, I realized the power of it. But in any case, the reason that change didn't happen is that no speaker wants the technology to be so that they can be silently heckled from the audience, except maybe me. I would enjoy that. But anyway, so I'll start, because you're all going to tell stories of change. I'll start with a story of change that I like to tell, which is when I became president of NAC, the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, which was at the time a very powerful women's group. 600 women's groups were members. And I was a radical when I became president, very unusual person to become president of NAC at the time. But the government was moving to the right. Brian Mulroney, he looks kind of radical left now and compared, but then we thought he was right wing. And so for some reason, the women of NAC thought if they got a real radical as president, that would be the right way to go. So anyway, I was president. It was kind of an unusual situation for me to be in that position. And but one thing I knew was that NAC tended to be a very white middle-class organization, and the country was changing. There were a lot of people of color. Aboriginal women had been involved in NAC, but not much, and that I wanted to see that change in NAC while I was there. So the first or second meeting that I chaired, there was a woman there who burst out in tears and left the room, which I thought was pretty appropriate behavior for a meeting. If you're going to start crying, just do it on your own time, So I was pretty hardline political person, and also I didn't have much time for this person. Anyway, I noticed that there are 3 Aboriginal women on the executive, and I noticed that they were uncomfortable. So I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And they said, "No, that's not how we do things." So I said, "Well, how do you do things?" "Oh, it's okay. This is your meeting. We'll adapt." And I said, "No. We want you to feel included, so tell me, And they said, "Well, in our beliefs, emotions are part of what's happening in a meeting, and we think people should feel free to express their emotions in the meeting." And I went to myself, "Oh my God." Oh my God, And, but I wanted them to feel included, so I said, "Okay. What does that mean in terms of how we conduct the meeting?" So they said, "Well," and I know this doesn't sound radical now, but in 1990 it was very radical. They said, "Well, at the beginning of every meeting, we'll go around the room and everybody will say how they're feeling." And this was like my version of hell. In 1984, when they had that list of things, what's the worst thing, like the rats biting your nose or whatever. Being in a NAC meeting with everybody talking about their feelings, that was very high on my list, at least top 5. But I had a priority, which was I wanted to change the organization so that Aboriginal women would feel at home. So I knew I couldn't possibly lead this. So I asked Priscilla Satie, who was an Aboriginal woman from Saskatchewan and the eldest of the group, to lead this. And I want to tell you that, and even I recognized at the time, by doing this, completely transformed our meetings. Because what happened was, and I'm sure most of you know how this worked, is that if somebody had a fight with their boyfriend the night before, or whatever it might be, they could just let it out and say, "I had a fight with my boyfriend last night or my girlfriend last night, and I'm really angry," right? And then that anger didn't come into the meeting. Or if someone was uptight or anxious about a discussion that was going to happen, they could say so, and then people could be a little more sensitive about how they talked about that, or maybe talk, out of the meeting with that woman about it. And it completely transformed our meeting. And in the years when I was president of NAC, because I do tend to be a change agent and push boundaries, we were under a lot of attack. We had a lot of issues that we were fighting, a lot of people mad at us, but we got a lot of attention too. we had the most calm and productive executive meetings that NAC had ever had in its history. And this was the reason. And I had to change. So that's my first thing. That if you want to make change, you have to be willing to change. That is the most important quality of making change. And you know, we're not willing to change. It's hard to change. And especially our organizations are not willing to change. And this is true because, you know, I see a lot of people in this room, a lot of people who are of my generation, or maybe within 10 years of me, because I'm a lot older than I look. But, you know, we built, you know, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, we built up agencies and organizations to serve people, marginalized people, people who didn't have a voice. And it was those people who built those organizations, and a lot of women building these organizations. And at a certain point, it happened that we became comfortable in what we were doing. And we started, instead of serving people, or not instead of, but as well as serving people, we were also serving ourselves and building our organizations. And that's not a bad thing, because today we have all kinds of institutions like your own that are doing great work and helping a lot of people. But the problem is we stopped changing. We started to protect the status quo. And that's a big problem. And so I think if you want to be a change agent in the world, we have to be willing to change ourselves and to point out to our organizations how they have to change. That, I think, is really the first thing of being a change agent. And I would say the other thing is to speak out. Now that, as some of you who know me will know, has never been a problem for me. But I do know that it's hard, and you know, it's the Canadian culture thing, which I come originally from New York, so you know, I'm a New York Jew. Like, it's in my genes, right, to say what I think. But Canada, we have a little bit of a different culture. At least we used to have a little bit of a different culture, so that people are more reserved and, you know, less likely to speak out. But if you want to change things, you have to speak out. And also realize that making change, you often get resistance. There's two things that happen when you make change. The first thing is you get the initial resistance. That's kind of the easy part, the initial resistance, because you know what's going to come. You know, if you're speaking out and saying things people don't want to hear, they're going to argue against you. That's at the first stage. Then, you know, maybe you'll persuade them and they'll open up a little bit. And this happens in anti-racist work all the time. So people are persuaded we need more people of color in our organization. You know, this would be in a university, on a board, in staff, right? And so mostly you can get people to the point where they say, yes, let's try and hire someone who's a person of color, someone from an immigrant community. And that's great. Someone from a poor background, a disabled person, whatever it might be, to better represent the clients we're serving. Then that person comes in and everybody's happy and they get their training and so on and so forth. And then they suggest that maybe there's some things we could do that we haven't been doing to better serve the people that they're representing.